Have you ever experienced change? I'm talking about the type of change when the foundations of your reality shift completely. When your entire sense of security and familiarity vanish. The type of change that requires you to adapt to the new reality because the world as you knew it has now dissolved. In essence, you have to begin again. You have to navigate through tough emotions, seek help from strangers, professionals, and find support with new friends. One such foundational change is welcoming a newborn child into your family. On one hand, you are thrilled beyond words, and on the other hand, your world is turned upside down. The routines that you and your spouse had in place now need to change in order to adapt to this young human's needs. Moving can be another foundational change. I have moved many, many times in my life, and each of these moves required me to readjust. I've had to navigate grief as I allowed myself to feel the losses that moving from one place to another brings. I needed to seek the support of trusted friends in person, but mostly by phone and social media. I needed to take courage and seek out new connections. About 30 years ago, my little family moved to Columbia, South Carolina from Southern California, so that my kid's father could complete his psych residency at the University of Southern Carolina, the other USC. This long distance move required us to say goodbye to friends that we had known for over 6 years. Saying goodbye to a house that we loved, did routines and soccer friends, and then that stuff that you had to say goodbye to. The kids had to say goodbye to toys. There was no Zillow at that time, but somehow we found a cute house to rent for the year. It was in walking distance to the kids' school, and Ian and Susan were nervous, but they were excited because they now could walk home from school. Susan was thrilled to meet new friends, and Ian not so much. And I wasn't sure what I would do for a year. I had some writing jobs and thought I'd also use the time exploring the area. But truth be told, I knew that if I didn't have some people to interact with, my mental health would suffer. Well, it didn't take long for my daughter to have an idea. She got her markers out and some printer paper, and she made a couple of signs. And she announced that she would tape them on all the poles, the light poles in our neighborhood. She was a third grader. Her sign said, "Help, my mom needs friends." And then she had our phone number on it. Please call. She didn't feel real sorry for me, but she just thought that she was being helpful. Well, long story short, I made sure those signs did not get up. I signed up for a beginner's quilt class, and the instructor invited me to join her quilting bee. We met once a month, and I'm sure some of you have been a part of quilting bees. We met once a month, about 12 women or so. Each month, this was a whole new experience for me. Each month was a bit of a show and tell, telling and sharing our quilting progress, giving suggestions when someone asked. We made simple quilts for unhoused families together, and we supported each other through hospital stays and family deaths. And when I moved away just 10 months later, they had a party for me. I was connected to this group. I received a fat quarter. Some of you know what that is. A fat quarter from their fabric stash. Each person in the group was in this little basket with their little their fabric was in the basket. The memory of that year always, to this day, warms my heart. They shared tangible support, helped me not to just get through the year, but to thrive. I couldn't have done it without them. The quilt top that you see here was what I made during that time. It's a reminder of me that we need each other. It is true, as we heard Paula read from Ecclesiastes, a cord of 3 strands is not easily broken. We need God and we need each other. We can't go through this life alone. But we live in a pull yourself up by the bootstraps culture, and that makes it difficult for us to embrace the full meaning of togetherness, connection, and mutual support. And our independent-minded culture has influenced the wrong belief that God helps those who help themselves. And so we need to be reminded that God created us to live in community and that we are called to come alongside one another. In fact, Christmas is when we celebrate that God came to live with us. Emmanuel, God with us. I think our built-in need to be interdependent and society's message that one's goal is supposed to be independent is one of our major struggles in life. Jesus taught and lived interdependence. In fact, Jesus didn't just drop from heaven all on his own, did he? He came into the world with the help and support of so many people. And so to embrace communal life is both radical and deeply faithful. We see this in the story of Ruth and Naomi. Their story begins before the Jewish people had a king, and during a time when Bethlehem experienced great famine caused by a severe drought. Wanting the best for his family, Elimelech, Naomi's husband, decided to uproot the family from their familiar homeland and cross the Jordan River into the foreign land of Moab. This was a risky decision. Moab was an enemy territory. But in order to be assured that his family would have food, Elimelech took the risk, hoping to save Naomi and their 2 sons. However, no sooner do they arrive in Moab, Elimelech dies and Naomi is left alone to raise her children, strangers in a foreign land. I imagine life was difficult for them. I imagine she may have thought, if we would have stayed in Bethlehem, our kinship community would have taken care of us. The connection that we have through our family lineage would have provided for our needs. Years went by. Naomi's sons reached marrying age and married Moabite women, one named Orpah and the other named Ruth. But sadly, within 10 years, both sons died, leaving Naomi destitute and in deep grief. Now, she is really alone. And in a patriarchal society, no husband or sons to care for her. In addition, her daughters-in-law are also grieving. But then, in the midst of her deep grief, Naomi learns that God has blessed her homeland with good rains. The famine is over, the crops are ready to harvest. And in the midst of her despair, she now has a glimmer of hope. She considers the risk of traveling through the wilderness back over the Jordan River to return to her people. Orpah and Ruth decide to take the journey with her. They hadn't walked very far when Naomi changes her mind. She reconsiders the decision to bring Ruth and Orpah along with her and instructs them to go back to their families. She reminds them that they are young and would have better opportunities finding husbands in Moab than in Naomi's Hebrew land of Bethlehem. The women begged to go with her. But Naomi, who is concerned with their welfare, insists that they go back to their mothers. She kisses them both and they cry all the tears, but the two women refused to leave her. We want to go with you and live among you and your people, they said to Naomi, and after some back and forth discussions, Orpah decides to return. But Ruth resists, and she tells Naomi not to try and change her mind. Where you go, I will go. Where you live, I will live too. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. And so Naomi and Ruth begin again. Together, they companioned each other on the journey home. Ruth's decision to travel with Naomi and to relocate to a foreign land was indeed an act of love. Despite the risks involved, her decision beautifully illustrated her inherent kindness and desire to help. And it was a formation of a new family built not on blood, but on kinship. Ruth and Naomi's story exemplifies the belief that our lives are better when they are intertwined. Ruth's response is rooted and grounded in being bound to another. In the face of loss, these family ties are deepened through a spiritual bond of connection, commitment, and community. Ruth is willing to live, worship, work, advocate, and walk alongside Naomi and her people. This relationship is not one-sided. For Ruth to have this type of love for Naomi, Naomi must have had an open giving and receiving spirit that enabled her to embrace her daughter-in-law. A deep bond must have developed between them. This is a mutual, interdependent relationship. We often hear the Ecclesiastes verse about needing a three-strand cord at weddings. Have you heard that? We also hear Ruth's words to Naomi at weddings, "Where you go, I will go." And yet, these biblical phrases are not inherently romantic. Their core message applies more broadly. Ruth's response echoes the unending and far-reaching love of God. God is always coming alongside of us, loving us into life, fullness of life, wholeness. It was their mutual caring relationship that enabled Ruth and Naomi to a place of wholeness. You may recognize the quilt square that is featured today on your bulletin and on the screen. It's a log cabin patchwork design. The strips of cloth are the logs that spiral around a center square, symbolizing home, warmth, and safety. As in every quilt square, it takes different stripes or pieces of cloth to make a whole square. And it takes many squares to make a whole quilt. A quilt that will wrap around us to give us warmth. By the mercy of God and because of God's grace, you and I, each other in this room and throughout the world, really, we are bound to one another like pieces in a quilt. What if we took Ruth and Naomi's vows to heart, just beginning here in our community of faith? What if we acknowledge to each other that your pain is not your own, but is now my pain? The plight of your people is held in my hands, in my heart, as if they were my own. Where you journey and walk, I too will journey and walk alongside you with God's help. Friends, the God who walks with us promises to help us walk with one another, to walk in a mutual, connected, supported way toward wholeness. Amen.